I'm Anne Riddell. From the newest research, questions about mammograms and diagnosis, to cutting-edge technology, we've got the very latest updates on breast cancer treatment. Science and You starts now.
I'm Dr. Max Gomez. An unusual controversy has broken out amongst breast cancer doctors. It's over whether everything that's being called breast cancer really is cancer. In other words, is breast cancer being overdiagnosed, leading to potentially harmful intervention and treatment? Not to mention the psychological stress a cancer diagnosis leads to. Here's what you need to know. You only have to ask a few women on the street to realize how emotional an issue breast cancer is for women.
I've got 2 kids and I'd want to live as long as I could, so I'd take care of it. Probably having a double mastectomy if that's what it took.
I would do whatever it took. And again, just thinking of my family, to be around is much more important to me than a minimalist approach.
One thing that has helped to ease women's fear of breast cancer is early detection. The assurance at finding a cancer at its earliest and smallest stage vastly improves the odds for cure. And breast cancer survival statistics have in fact improved as screening mammograms have become increasingly common. But what if a lot of what doctors have been calling breast cancer really isn't cancer?
There is no doubt that we are overdiagnosing and overtreating breast cancer. As our screening technology has improved, the problem is that we find a lot of things that probably have no biologic significance.
That's not an isolated opinion, a viewpoint just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association by a group of experts advising the National Cancer Institute recommends changing the definition of a number of cancers and even eliminating the word cancer from some common diagnoses. Near the top of their overdiagnosis and name change list is ductal carcinoma in situ, or DCIS, stage 0.
We run a real risk by telling patients with DCIS that they have cancer because they think of themselves as being at higher risk than they really are. Really, these patients are at risk for developing cancer.
In fact, years ago, gynecologists changed what they call abnormal cells found in a pap smear.
We used to talk about different levels of dysplasia, and super severe dysplasia had this name carcinoma in situ. Scared patients because it's got that cancer word in it. Years ago, we changed the nomenclature in gynecology. We now talk about CIN, cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, 1, 2, 3, but no longer use that carcinoma word because it wasn't truly cancer.
In other words, DCIS stage 0 in the breast is abnormal cells that are a risk factor for cancer and may never become cancer. The fly in the ointment is being able to predict with certainty what those abnormal cells are going to do.
The problem is that right now, just by looking at it, with all the molecular tests we have and looking at the appearance of the microscope, we can't say with assurance that what we're looking at is going to be benign or is going to be indolent. So at the present time, we have to treat everything as potentially dangerous until we get better at finding out how come some things are dangerous and some things aren't.
Still, many experts argue that what you call something has an impact on treatment.
It has made all the difference in the world for the patients. When you told the patient she had carcinoma in situ, she wanted to do anything yesterday to get rid of it. If you tell someone they have CIN3 and we're going to treat that with a certain kind of treatment, she's not nearly as afraid because it doesn't have that cancer word in it.
Others argue, why not be safe and treat all DCIS as cancer? The trouble with that approach is that carries some real risks too.
I mean, there is no doubt that in the world of medicine, bad things happen. You have to be very cautious about the unanticipated complications of surgery, radiation, hormonal therapy, of everything that we do, because things don't always work out exactly as planned.
And that's the concern here, that many women may be having treatments that have side effects, both physical and emotional, that are actually worse than the abnormal cells themselves. But until science can figure out which abnormal cells are going to become invasive cancer down the road, Women need to have a very serious discussion with their doctors, realizing that DCIS doesn't necessarily mean cancer. I'm Dr. Max Gomez for Science and You.
I'm Anne Riddell. Breast cancer, it can be a devastating and overwhelming diagnosis for patients and their families. But as cutting-edge research shows, knowledge is a powerful weapon against the disease. Breast cancer survivor Marjorie Schwartz knows exactly what it feels like in those days following diagnosis.
My own cancer was found on a sonogram. I did not know what to do. Like almost every other woman, I was totally overwhelmed.
That was 8 years ago. Now Marjorie works with other women through the support organization SHARE. She encourages them to do their research because so much has changed when it comes to treating breast cancer.
They feel like a bomb has been dropped into their lives, and of course a bomb has been dropped into their lives, but we urge them to take the time to figure out their diagnosis and not act too quickly so that they do the right thing. Each woman really has to figure out her own pathology with her doctor and chart a course that's very individualized, much more so than it has ever been in the past.
Heather Mcarthur, a breast cancer doctor at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, explains why an individualized approach is so important. Breast cancer is not a single disease.
Just as though each individual on planet Earth is unique and different, each tumor is unique and different.
Dr. Mcarthur is working on cutting-edge research here in immunotherapy. The goal, to train a patient's own immune system to recognize and fight cancer cells so that after the patient's breast cancer is cured, it doesn't come back.
What we're doing is combining freezing of the tumor tissue to create tiny little tumor fragments that are more digestible to the immune system, because a big lump of tumor tissue is difficult for the immune system to process, but tiny little tumor pieces are much more digestible. So we freeze the tumor with a process called cryoablation, which is just a medical term for freezing, and then administer an immune boosting drug so that an individual can develop a robust immune response to all those individual tumor fragments. In other words, you're not just focusing on one specific feature, you're allowing the thousands, if not millions, of features to present themselves to the immune system with the hope that at a later date, if the body were presented with that information again in the form of a recurrence, that your own immune system would recognize that because it had developed memory and would therefore attack any cells that had that information.
It almost sounds like the stuff of science fiction, our own bodies taught to recognize and attack our own specific cancer. Dr. Mcarthur says the work is part of an ongoing clinical trial and experimental at this point, but she believes in the promise of immunotherapy.
My dream is that this becomes standard of care. The only way that we make any advancement in this field, the only way that we move this field forward is through research.
The good news, experts are learning more about breast cancer all the time. So for patients, that means more potential to beat the disease. I'm Anne Riddell for Science and You.
Hi, I'm Tinabeth Pina. Now, while the benefits of a mammogram are not disputed, there are still questions behind what age to start regular screenings.
What we know is that annual screening mammography starting at age 40 has been shown to decrease breast cancer-related mortality. Now, it's not going to save every life. There are lots of reasons for that, but people's chance of surviving a breast cancer are extremely high if they're getting the annual screening mammography than if they're not.
Dr. Jian Lee is among those in the medical community who concur with the latest data that encourages average-risk women to start their baseline mammograms at 40. The Harvard University study of 7,300 breast cancer patients found that more than 2/3 of breast cancer deaths occurred in younger women with no history of mammography or with intervals of 2 years or more between screenings. Unscreened women accounted for 71% of breast cancer deaths over an 18-year period, and the median age with a fatal diagnosis was 49.
This is just the latest of many, many, many studies that have been going back to reinforce the very same thing. We know for a fact that a good 20 to 25% of breast cancer diagnoses are women in their 40s. And this is one of the reasons why we feel so passionate about making sure we don't give up this fight. But I also want to make sure that people understand that when they're under 40, there's nothing protective about that necessarily. It's just that the odds are less. So women in under 40 age group probably comprise about a 5% of the cancer diagnoses. So that's not zero. So that's why it's important for people to still be doing things like checking themselves, being aware of changes in their body, making sure that they're getting regular physical exams with their physician, and if it means coming in for a mammogram because that's part of the evaluation for anything, then absolutely we're happy to see them.
According to a controversial study released 4 years ago by the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, women were told that they could wait until they were 50 before getting regular mammograms and could get them every other year.
Since then, I think the only really silver lining around this dark cloud is the fact that now there's been such a proliferation of new research that has specifically looked at those criticisms and further validated and reinforced what we still believe are the right recommendations to put forth all along.
According to the American Cancer Society, the earliest breast cancers are detected by mammograms, and they decrease breast cancer deaths by 30%. Cancers detected in early stages have a 98% cure rate. Nevertheless, mammograms do have their limitations.
Women also should be told of the limitations of mammography at this time. That is that women who get mammograms, some will be called back because they have abnormalities that turn out not to be cancer. Another important limitation is some cancers will be missed by mammography and clinical breast exam.
Breast density is the main limitation, and we know that. That's not something that anybody has ever kept a secret. So we know that about breast density, and we know that about mammography. But we also know that mammography, not only all the strength and the volume of the data behind it, but because it's still the best test for looking for calcium deposits, which are frequently a sign of an early breast cancer. It doesn't have to be. A lot of calcium is benign, but it can be the earliest sign that we see even in a dense mammogram.
We're actually hoping that medicine and indeed engineering is going to give us some better tests, something much better than mammography, to help us identify a breast cancer.
Something called tomosynthesis. Some people refer to it as 3D mammography, but it's a way of using the same low-dose X-ray technology to go thin section by thin section through the breast using equipment we already have, and that'll allow us to get through the dense breast tissue layer by layer to help us find things that could otherwise be obscured. So that is something, that is a version of mammography doing even better with the technology that's already standard of care. The screening mammography was designed to be annual for a reason. It's so that it can do its best job picking up true changes that really turn out to be cancer, but otherwise not having to worry about all kinds of other little things that turn out not to be.
The bottom line is you need to get a mammogram, but it's up to you and your physician to figure out a screening plan based on your personal risk. For Science and You, I'm Tinabeth Pina.
I'm Magalie Laguerre-Wilkinson. We're here at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center's Department of Clinical Genetics. We'll talk to an expert about the now known BRCA1 and 2 gene mutations. The term BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene mutations, also known as BRCA1 and BRCA2, became somewhat familiar a few months ago when the actress Angelina Jolie went public with a very private decision, a preventive double mastectomy. She's not alone, though, in that decision. Many women in the United States who carry that same gene mutation have done what the Hollywood star felt was her only option. Dr. Noah Kauf is the director of ovarian cancer screening and prevention in the Clinical Genetics and Gynecology Services at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center.
I think as you're putting into context whether or not risk reduction strategies are drastic, I think you have to understand that the risks are quite substantial and very real. And that given the magnitude of the risk, that more aggressive risk reduction strategies are likely warranted.
According to the American Cancer Society, breast cancer is the second leading cause of death in women, lung cancer being the first. And while women who are non-carriers of the BRCA1 and 2 gene mutations have a 2% chance of developing breast cancer by age 50, carriers of the gene mutation are at greater risk.
For women with mutations in BRCA1 or BRCA2, rather than having a 2% chance of developing breast cancer by age 50, their risk is 26 to 39%. So anywhere from a 1 in 3 to a 1 in 4 chance, as opposed to 1 in 50 for women in the general population.
BRCA1 and BRCA2 were identified in 1994 and 1995. And since then, it has been the hope of geneticists and researchers alike to identify the gene mutation in its early stages.
There are a number of things a number of red flags which would suggest you should have an evaluation by a cancer genetics professional. Those would include if you have a family history of breast cancer prior to age 50. And that would be not just in yourself, but close relatives on either your mother or your father's side of the family.
While preventive mastectomy can be a radical choice against developing breast cancer, and often a very difficult decision for women, Dr. Kauf says there are methods beyond a regular mammogram they need to be aware of to aid in prevention and earlier detection.
We actually know that mammography alone in women with BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutations will miss over 60% of the cancers. And given that both the American Cancer Society and the National Comprehensive Cancer Network recommend screening with a combination of both mammography and MRI starting no later than age 30 in the setting of a woman with a BRCA1 or BRCA2. Additionally, one of the cornerstones of prevention of breast cancer in women with BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutations is actually removing the ovaries after childbearing is complete, but before menopause. Doing this will reduce the risk of breast cancer in women with these mutations by 40 to 70%.
Experts do say that as treatment and research evolve, preventive surgery may no longer be the only life-saving option. I'm Magalie Laguerre-Wilkinson for Science and You.
I'm Donna Hanover. The number of young women being diagnosed with breast cancer each year has been increasing. That raises questions about why the numbers are going up, how we find breast cancer, and what these young women face.
There's zero cancer in my family. They even called while I was at this appointment, and I said hi and pretended I wasn't sitting in a breast surgeon's office in a hospital gown.
When he said I was going to lose my hair, that's when I was like, oh, no. It's not going to work. I don't think so.
Even today, at 5 years out, I'm constantly thinking about recurrence.
As a young mother, what was going through your mind?
That I was going to die and leave my child without a mother.
Columbia Doctors Midtown breast cancer surgeon Dr. Margaret Chen says although previously only 5% of breast cancers appeared in women under 40, the number is dramatically increasing.
The notion that young women do not get breast cancer, that is a myth, that is not true. There was a recent report in the Journal of American Medical Association that found the rate of breast cancer in these young women between the ages of 25 to 39 has actually doubled in the past 34 years.
At a recent gathering, several women who were diagnosed with breast cancer in their 20s and 30s revealed a common problem. They or their doctors delayed taking action when they found a lump. Mabel Harrison, who's a registered nurse, delayed because 10 years prior she had a cyst.
So flash forward to, let's say last year. Around this time I noticed a lump on the left breast, and I thought, oh, it's a cyst, not going to worry about it. I promptly delayed for 5 months. Until I noticed the nipple itself was not as reactive as the right side. And being a nurse, I knew then that it was not a cyst.
Marlena Ortiz did go to the doctor right away.
She just touched it and told me it was a fibroid to come back in 6 months.
Delay is a big problem because when breast cancer occurs in women under 40, it's often more aggressive and faster growing than in older women. It also raises issues of fertility, which Kira Goldenberg says her doctors failed to mention.
You can't have kids while you're on tamoxifen anyway, because it causes birth defects, because it deprives your body of estrogen. And they just said, here, take this for 5 years. So I'm told it shouldn't be a problem. But in reality, who knows what at least 5 years of estrogen deprivation will do to a 20-something.
Some young women, especially if they'll have chemo, do go through the complex process of harvesting their eggs.
It was crazy expensive, so on top of cancer being so expensive, my parents pushed for it more, so that's why I did it.
Anna Solomon made a different choice.
I was really worried, about my life and just saving my life to be there for the 8-year-old that I had. And I didn't want to leave another baby behind if something happened, God forbid.
Besides getting treatment, many young women want to do more to fight back. Mylette Lopez, a partner at Squeaky Wheel Media, gave information for the new book, Getting Things Off My Chest by Melanie Young. Mylette also created an award-winning website called IHadCancer.com.
It was built so that anyone who's been affected by cancer can connect with others who've been through a similar situation.
Marlena also created a website, beatingcancerinheels.org, that includes beauty advice like dressing with a mastectomy, drawing eyebrows, and styling head wraps. In studying the reasons more women this age are getting breast cancer, researchers have found an increase in estrogen receptor-positive cancers, meaning they seem to be fed by hormones.
We think that this is probably related to lifestyle factors and hormonal factors. So things such as less breastfeeding, such as women having children when they're older than the age of 30, having fewer children, being on hormones, having a less...
Like birth control pills.
Right, exactly, and being less active in their lifestyle, eating more of a meat and sweet diet.
In any case, many of these women find strength in full-out facing the reality of the moment.
Being bald was very liberating.
I just stopped wearing my head wraps and hats and stuff and just started rocking the henna. And people are funny, like on subways before they would never say anything with the headscarf, but now they're, I love what you did, are you a survivor? And I hear a lot of people, I wish I had done that. Well, you can still shave your head, is usually what I tell them, and they're like, no,
But so it's a way of taking
taking control and a little bit of, damn it, cancer took my hair, but I'm gonna take my beauty back.
As many young women with breast cancer have discovered, sticking together to find information about treatments, facilitate research, and discuss the choices they have to make gives them strength in facing the future. I'm Donna Hanover for Science and You.
I'm Mike Gilliam for Science and You. Breast cancer is devastating in minority communities, and the mortality rates are even higher in poor, underserved neighborhoods. But one organization is bridging that gap. Project Renewal is running something called the Scan Van.
For the last 27 years, Mary Solomon has been running the Scan Van. She's been bringing mammograms to women who are uninsured or who live in underserved communities.
Scan Van is a wonderful program. What we're able to do is we're able to provide women, regardless of whether or not they're insured, uninsured, we're able to provide them with a screening mammography, a clinical breast exam, and in the case of the uninsured, we're also able to provide them with free Pap testing, cervical screening testing, as well as free colorectal screening testing as well.
Now you're serving communities that are underserved, okay? Why is that important?
There's a big disparity between the, shall I say, haves and the have-nots. We know that part of the problem is it's more difficult for the underserved not only to be screened, but to be provided with timely follow-up and timely treatment and consistent treatment.
And while there are more cases in white women, the mortality rate among African American women is greater and is declining at a slower pace than their white counterparts. Rates for Latinas and Asians are generally lower. Follow-up care is a problem.
Part of the problem is the system. It's a unwieldy system. Very difficult sometimes for patients to navigate, especially if they don't speak the language, especially if they perceive that this was going to cost them a lot of money. These problems are also rooted in just the way patients live their lives, the amount of responsibilities they have around their homes, their jobs. Just putting food on the table is an effort. Now we're just piling on with this additional need to perhaps go to a hospital every day for treatment. This is a huge barrier or this is a huge problem for a lot of patients.
The scan van goes out every week to various community centers and health centers where they conduct mammographies.
This is very excellent for the community and for low-income people and for elderly. They cannot travel.
Maricela McGreevy was screened in a scan van, and she says it saved her life. Her son David was 2.5 years old, and she had just stopped breastfeeding when she noticed a lump on her breast.
I didn't really pay any attention to it. One day I just said, you know what, I better try to get this free mammogram because I didn't have health insurance. And I'm glad that I did that, because if I hadn't done it, I would have never found out that the lump that I had was not a buildup of milk, but it was actually breast cancer. I totally felt horrible because all I could think of was who's going to take care of David, who's going to take care of Lloyd.
But treatment saved her and her family, leading to this heartwarming moment.
Thank you for my mom.
I am so thankful for life. There is no such thing as a bad day, because every day that you have breath in your lungs, it's a good day.
Mary says the scan van screens about 5,000 women a year. It all started when her mother realized something was wrong with Mary's grandmother.
And she was diagnosed with a very early stage breast cancer, thank goodness, simply because my mother stumbled upon it. She was treated, and my grandmother lived to 93 and died of a stroke, not of breast cancer.
That incident prompted Mary's mother, Diana Trulio, to found the Women's Outreach Network, the first modern mammography van in the city in a very long time. That was back in 1983. Her mother did some research and eventually contacted Dr. Philip Strax, who had run mobile vans and conducted a study into mammography years earlier. A short time later, Mary joined her mother on the van and has been helping women ever since.
I joined my mother in 1987, and together we were screening women for several years together. And in 1999, my mother's breast cancer was found during a routine screen on board one of our scan vans. And my mother today is 80 years old, and she's well. And she's well because her breast cancer was found at the very earliest of stages, and she was treated. And she will remain well, and she will be cancer-free for the rest of her life, only because of screening mammography.
And she has a message for all women.
I don't want to hear the excuse, it's not in my family. I don't want to hear the excuse, I can't afford it. If you have not had a mammogram in the past year, and you are 40 years or older, you need to have a mammogram every year. And we stand here ready to provide it to you if you have no insurance or if you don't know how to access your a mammographer in your area.
So the bottom line is follow the advice of health professionals and get those mammograms. It will allow you to live a longer, healthier life. I'm Mike Gilliam for Science and You.
That's our show for today. I'm Anne Riddell. We'll see you next time on Science and You.